Hollywood once sold cigarettes as glamorous accessories, the ultimate symbol of cool. But behind the silver screen, those smoke-filled sets came with a price that no star could escape. How many golden era icons lit up the screen only to burn out too soon? Today we're diving into 40 legendary actors whose final curtain call came from lung cancer. Think you know them all? Brace yourself, you might gasp at who's on this list. Humphrey Bogart. The king of cool himself, Humphrey Bogart, practically invented the image of the trench coat, fedora, and ever-present cigarette. From Casablanca to the Maltese Falcon, his smoldering presence was inseparable from smoke curling across the screen. Off camera, it was no act. Bogart was a heavy smoker, puffing constantly between takes. In 1956, his health began to fail, and doctors discovered esophageal cancer linked to years of smoking. By January 1957, he was gone at just 57. His death stunned Hollywood not only because of his age, but because Bogey seemed immortal. The man who once sneered, "Here's looking at you, kid," was taken by the very habit that defined his image. His story remains a chilling reminder. The cool look of a cigarette hit a very real killer. Clark Gable. The king of Hollywood, Clark Gable, was every bit the rugged American hero, and his larger-than-life persona was often paired with a cigarette dangling from his lips. In Gone with the Wind, audiences swooned over Rhett Butler's charm, but behind the charisma was a man burning through packs daily. Gable's health collapsed in 1960 shortly after filming The Misfits alongside Marilyn Monroe. Initially thought to be stress-related, doctors later confirmed he had severe heart problems worsened by a lifetime of smoking. Gable developed complications tied to lung cancer, and within weeks he was gone at only 59. Fans were devastated. How could Rhett Butler, the man who didn't give a damn, be struck down so fast? His exit wasn't just tragic, it was cinematic irony. The screen's most confident man couldn't conquer the smoke that shadowed him. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper embodied the strong, silent hero, honest, upright, and the face of American westerns. But his off-screen life told a different story. Cooper was a chain smoker, often seen with a cigarette in hand between takes. His rugged charm was inseparable from the smoke-filled saloons of his films. In the late 1950s, Cooper was diagnosed with lung cancer that spread to his prostate and bones. The disease was swift and merciless. He passed away in 1961 at the age of 60. His death shocked fans who still saw him as the invincible cowboy. Cooper's passing highlighted how deeply smoking was woven into the golden era. Heroes who looked immortal on screen were, in reality, fragile. His death didn't just sadden fans, it shattered the illusion of the invulnerable Hollywood leading man, Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson was the face of the gangster era, snarling lines in films like Little Caesar with a cigar or cigarette as his permanent sidekick. Audiences loved his sharp suits, raspy voice, and no-nonsense style, but Robinson's on-screen props carried a deadly off-screen cost. By the early 1970s, Robinson was battling lung cancer, a disease that slowly drained the fire out of Hollywood's original tough guy. In 1973, he passed at 79, just weeks after receiving an honorary Oscar. He didn't live long enough to accept it himself. Robinson's death marked the end of a generation where cigarettes weren't just props, they were part of an actor's identity. The irony was bitter. The screen's most indestructible gangster couldn't outwit the silent hitman of lung cancer. Steve McQueen. If cool had a face in the 1960s, it was Steve McQueen. He was the anti-hero, the rebel, the man behind The Great Escape and Bullet, and he was rarely seen without a cigarette or cigar clenched in his teeth. McQueen's off-screen life was just as reckless, racing cars, motorcycles, and burning through packs daily. By the late 1970s, his health began to falter. Doctors discovered a rare form of cancer linked to asbestos exposure and smoking. Despite experimental treatments in Mexico, McQueen died in 1980 at just 50 years old. His death stunned the world. The king of cool who outran Nazis, bullets, and explosions couldn't outrun cancer. McQueen's passing was proof that Hollywood's tough guy image crumbled when faced with a far deadlier enemy. The smoke he once thought made him look untouchable. John Wayne. John Wayne was more than an actor. He was an American institution. The Duke, with his deep drawl and towering presence, shaped the cowboy myth for generations. But behind the bravado, Wayne was a notorious heavy smoker, often carrying cartons of cigarettes to film sets. In 1964, he was diagnosed with lung cancer and underwent surgery to remove a lung and several ribs. He survived for years afterward, but cancer returned in the 1970s. By 1979, Wayne had lost the battle at 72. His death marked the end of the Western's greatest legend. What makes Wayne's story unforgettable is the irony. America's toughest cowboy who survived countless shootouts on screen fell to the one gunfight no one could win. A lifetime of smoke slowly choking him out. Lee J. Cobb. Lee J. Cobb had one of those commanding presences you could never forget. From his role in On the Waterfront to 12 Angry Men, he carried weight both literally and figuratively. Yet Cobb's gravelly voice and tense energy were no accident. He was a chain smoker. His reliance on cigarettes caught up with him in the mid-1970s. Diagnosed with lung cancer, Cobb's health declined rapidly. In 1976, he died at just 64. His death was another strike against the culture of smoking in Hollywood, where cigarettes weren't just accessories but necessities. Cobb was a man who played judges, bosses, and authority figures, yet he couldn't hold authority over his own health. His passing left audiences mourning the loss of one of the industry's strongest character actors. Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner's bald head, powerful voice, and intense gaze made him unforgettable in The King and I and The Magnificent Seven. Off-screen, though, Brynner was rarely without a cigarette. Years of chain smoking led to his lung cancer diagnosis in the early 1980s. What sets Brynner apart is his haunting final act. He recorded a PSA before his death, asking viewers never to smoke. It aired after his passing in 1985 at age 65, with Brynner's voice saying, "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke." His warning, delivered from beyond the grave, shocked audiences. Unlike many of his peers, Brynner turned his tragedy into a cautionary tale. Even in death, he commanded the stage. His legacy became not just about acting, but about saving lives. William Holden. William Holden had charisma to spare, winning an Oscar for Stalag 17 and starring in classics like Sunset Boulevard. He was the picture of mid-century cool, handsome, charming, and, like many of his peers, constantly smoking. Holden battled alcoholism as well, which made his health deteriorate faster. Though he died from an accidental fall in 1981, doctors revealed he had been suffering from lung cancer at the time. Holden's decline was rapid and sad, hidden behind Hollywood's golden smile. The irony of a man remembered for timeless roles dying alone was devastating. Holden's story is often overshadowed by the manner of his death, but the shadow of smoking hung over his final years. His legacy stands as both brilliance and warning. Joel McCrea. Joel McCrea was one of Hollywood's most dependable leading men, appearing in over 90 films across 4 decades. Known for westerns and comedies, McCrea embodied the easygoing charm audiences adored. But like many of his era, smoking was woven into his daily life. By the late 1980s, his health failed due to lung cancer. McCrea died in 1990 at 84, closing the curtain on a long and respected career. Unlike some stars who flamed out young, McCrea lived a full life. Yet his death still carried the bitter sting of smoking's legacy. He was the kind of actor who made success look effortless, but in the end, cigarettes claimed him like so many others. His story blends admiration with quiet sadness, a Hollywood stalwart brought down by an invisible enemy. Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden, the towering actor of films like Dr. Strangelove and The Asphalt Jungle, had a presence that could dominate any room. Rugged, unpredictable, and often rebellious, Hayden wasn't just a character on screen, he lived it. But one thing he couldn't rebel against was his addiction to cigarettes. A chain smoker for most of his life, Hayden's health began crumbling in the mid-1980s. The diagnosis was lung cancer, and it struck fast. In 1986, Hayden passed away at just 70. His death robbed Hollywood of a man who could play pirates, generals, and crooks with equal conviction. The tragedy? He had already walked away from Hollywood once to sail the seas, proving he could beat the studio system, but not the smoke. Hayden's story remains a bittersweet reminder that even the most adventurous spirits couldn't escape the era's most dangerous vice. Broderick Crawford. With his gruff voice and burly figure, Broderick Crawford carved out a reputation as one of Hollywood's most reliable tough guys. His Academy Award-winning performance in All the King's Men solidified him as a star, but audiences also remember him from the TV series Highway Patrol. Off-screen, Crawford was known for heavy drinking and constant smoking. These habits wore him down quickly. By the 1980s, lung cancer had taken its toll, leaving him a shadow of the robust figure audiences adored. He died in 1986 at 74. The irony of his career is striking. Crawford often played men in power, barking orders and controlling the screen. Yet he couldn't control the very habit that was destroying him. His gravelly delivery, once his signature, was a direct consequence of the cigarettes that ultimately took his life. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum was Hollywood's original bad boy. With his sleepy eyes, husky voice, and tough guy aura, he embodied film noir. And where there was Mitchum, there was smoke, on-screen, off-screen, everywhere. He treated cigarettes like extensions of his personality, but decades of chain smoking left their mark. By the 1990s, Mitchum was battling emphysema and lung cancer simultaneously. In 1997, at the age of 79, he died, just days before his friend James Stewart passed. Mitchum's departure felt like the end of an era. He had defined the outsider, the loner, the rebel who never played by the rules. Yet in the end, he was undone by the very image he sold. His career remains iconic, but his death is proof that Hollywood's version of cool came with a devastating cost. Fred MacMurray. Fred MacMurray was the everyman of classic Hollywood, starring in everything from Double Indemnity to Disney comedies. His smooth charm made him one of the most versatile actors of the Golden Age. But behind that clean-cut exterior was a lifelong smoker. By the late 1980s, the damage was irreversible. MacMurray was diagnosed with throat and lung cancer, forcing him to withdraw from public life. In 1991, he died at 83, leaving fans heartbroken. What stings is how sharply it contrasts with his on-screen persona. Audiences remembered him as the wholesome father figure from My Three Sons, a symbol of family values and stability. Yet off-screen, cigarettes were a hidden part of his daily routine. His death revealed a darker truth. Even the actors who seemed safest from vice weren't immune to Hollywood's smoking culture. Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson was the ultimate tough guy of the 1960s and 70s, starring in The Dirty Dozen and Death Wish. With his steel-eyed glare and rugged features, he didn't just play strong men, he embodied them. But Bronson's private life was dominated by cigarettes. He smoked heavily for decades, and in his later years, his health began to collapse. Diagnosed with lung cancer, Bronson battled the disease throughout the 1990s. By 2003, it claimed him at 81. His death was devastating for fans who saw him as indestructible, a man who could take on entire armies on screen. What made it more poignant was Bronson's image. He was Hollywood's symbol of resilience, yet cigarettes exposed his vulnerability. The irony couldn't be sharper. The man who seemed bulletproof was fatally wounded by smoke. Dean Martin. Dean Martin, the king of cool, made audiences swoon with his voice, humor, and effortless charisma. Whether crooning with Frank Sinatra or joking with Jerry Lewis, Martin was rarely seen without a cigarette or drink in hand. Smoking wasn't just a habit for him, it was practically part of his brand. But by the 1980s, his health suffered. Diagnosed with lung cancer in 1993, Martin's decline was rapid. He passed away in 1995 at 78. The tragedy? Martin's easygoing charm made it seem like he could glide through life untouched. But the reality was far harsher. Behind the laughter and songs was a man paying the price for decades of Hollywood's indulgences. Martin's story is a reminder that even the smoothest voices can be silenced by smoke. Steve Cochran. Steve Cochran was the handsome, brooding actor known for his roles in White Heat and Private Hell 36. His rugged looks and tough guy presence made him a natural fit for noir films. But like so many of his peers, Cochran lived hard and smoked harder. He often appeared with a cigarette on screen, but the habit never left him in real life. By the early 1960s, his health had deteriorated rapidly. In 1965, Cochran died at just 48. Lung cancer was a major factor, robbing him of what should have been decades of work. His death shocked fans because he was still in demand, still riding the wave of his dark, dangerous charm. Cochran's story is tragic not only because of his young age, but because smoking stole from Hollywood a leading man who hadn't yet reached his peak. Gig Young. Gig Young was a chameleon of an actor, winning an Oscar for They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, and bouncing effortlessly between comedy and drama. But he was also known for his troubled personal life, marked by alcoholism and constant smoking. Cigarettes were part of his persona, as common as his sharp delivery and charm. By the late 1970s, the years of smoking had caught up with him, contributing to a steep decline in health. In 1978, Young died at 64, his career and life cut short. Though controversy swirled around his passing, what's undeniable is how deeply cigarettes shaped his downfall. Young's story serves as yet another reminder that Hollywood's golden glow often masked darker truths. His talent was enormous, but the smoke slowly consumed it until there was nothing left. Robert Taylor. Robert Taylor was once branded the man with the perfect profile, a matinee idol whose polished looks defined MGM's stable of stars. But what fans didn't see was his lifelong reliance on cigarettes. By the late 1960s, Taylor's health collapsed. Diagnosed with lung cancer, he continued working for as long as he could, but the disease was unrelenting. He died in 1969 at just 57, leaving Hollywood stunned. The tragedy wasn't just his age, but the contrast. Taylor looked like a man who could never fade, yet he was extinguished far too soon. His death was a turning point, shaking audiences who realized that even the most pristine image could crumble. Taylor's story is a harsh lesson in how image and reality rarely line up in Hollywood. Dana Andrews. Dana Andrews was the leading man in classics like Laura and The Best Years of Our Lives, bringing intensity and quiet strength to every role. But his real-life weakness was cigarettes. Like many of his peers, Andrews smoked heavily, believing it gave him the rugged edge audiences admired. In later years, he struggled with health issues, eventually succumbing to lung cancer in 1992 at the age of 83. Fans mourned him not just as an actor, but as a gentleman of Hollywood's golden past. Andrews represented dignity, stability, and seriousness. Yet he too was claimed by the smoke-filled culture of his time. His story highlights the cruel uniformity of smoking's toll. It didn't matter if you were a rebel or a gentleman, a cowboy or a king. Cancer didn't discriminate. Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford was one of Hollywood's most dependable leading men, starring in Gilda, Blackboard Jungle, and countless westerns. Handsome, understated, and versatile, Ford's characters often smoked on screen, and so did he, off-screen, relentlessly. Over decades, the habit carved into his health. By the late 1990s, Ford's body was failing. He died in 2006 at 90, with lung cancer as a major factor. Though he lived longer than many peers, the disease cast a shadow over his final years. Fans remembered him for his smooth performances and enduring presence, but his death illustrated how even longevity couldn't erase the cost of smoking. Ford's career was one of consistency, rarely scandalous, always steady. Yet even that steadiness couldn't withstand the culture of smoke that defined his generation. The tough cowboy and the cool teacher were undone by cigarettes, proving once more how universal the danger was. Van Heflin. Van Heflin was never the flashiest star, but he was one of the most reliable, bringing depth to films like Shane and Johnny Eager. His rugged sincerity made him a favorite among audiences and critics alike. But away from the cameras, Heflin was a heavy smoker. In 1971, at just 60, he was struck by a heart attack complicated by lung cancer. His passing was sudden, leaving fans reeling at the loss of such a solid, grounded performer. Heflin's Arsene Arnaud death carried extra sting because he seemed like the type of actor who would quietly grow old in Hollywood, taking on wise elder statesman roles. Instead, cigarettes stole that chance. His story reminds us that the Golden Age's reliance on smoke didn't just claim the reckless, it claimed the steady, the stable, and the quietly brilliant too. George Sanders. George Sanders was the master of suave cynicism. With his smooth voice and biting delivery, he made villains irresistible in films like Rebecca and All About Eve. Off-screen, though, Sanders leaned heavily on cigarettes. His smoking habit, combined with a turbulent life, destroyed his health by the early 1970s. In 1972, at 65, lung cancer played a major role in his decline. For audiences, his departure was cruelly ironic. Sanders had perfected the role of men who seemed untouchable, dripping with wit and arrogance. Yet the reality was frailer. Behind the razor-sharp one-liners was a body slowly undone by smoke. His death symbolized how the Golden Age often glamorized self-destruction. Even Hollywood's most sophisticated voices weren't immune to the silent toll of cigarettes. Richard Boone. Richard Boone was one of the toughest faces in television and film, most famously in the series Have Gun, Will Travel. His craggy features and deep voice were perfect for westerns and crime dramas. But like many of his peers, Boone was rarely seen without a cigarette. The habit followed him through his career, eventually leading to a lung cancer diagnosis in the early 1980s. Boone died in 1981 at 63, another cowboy taken down by the very culture of smoke Hollywood had embraced. His loss was felt keenly among fans of westerns, where Boone had been a reliable figure of grit and steel. The irony is sharp. Men who played fearless gunfighters on screen couldn't fight off cigarettes in real life. Boone's death reinforced the tragic pattern repeating across the industry. Keenan Wynn. Keenan Wynn wasn't always the leading man, but he was everywhere. A character actor with a memorable face and booming energy, Wynn lit up films like Annie Get Your Gun, Dr. Strangelove, and numerous Disney productions. And like many character actors of the time, he also lit up cigarettes constantly. By the 1980s, Wynn's health crumbled under the weight of years of smoking. In 1986, at age 70, he died of lung cancer. His passing struck a chord because Wynn was the kind of actor audiences trusted. He was dependable, colorful, and always gave his characters depth. Losing him felt like losing an old friend. But his story is also another entry in the tragic Hollywood playbook. Talent that could light up any scene, extinguished by smoke that Hollywood once treated as harmless. Cesar Romero. Known as the Latin lover of 1930s, Hollywood and later as the flamboyant Joker in the 1960s Batman TV show, Cesar Romero had charisma to spare. Behind that polished charm, though, was a decades-long smoking habit. By the 90s, Romero's health declined sharply. Lung cancer took him in 1994 at the age of 86. Fans mourned not just the loss of his talent, but his sheer versatility. From musicals to comedies to campy villains, Romero was proof that charisma could carry an actor across genres. Yet even that sparkle couldn't cover the toll of cigarettes. His story demonstrates how smoking didn't care whether you were a leading man or a character actor. It claimed them all eventually. Romero's final role wasn't on stage or screen, but as another cautionary tale of Hollywood's deadly glamour. Jack Carson. Jack Carson was the jovial, wisecracking actor who added sparkle to both comedies and dramas. Films like Mildred Pierce showed his versatility, but fans loved his larger-than-life personality most. Off-screen, Carson was no different. Big laugh, big charm, and, unfortunately, big smoking habit. In the early 1960s, Carson was diagnosed with stomach and lung cancer. His decline was fast, and in 1963, he died at only 52. His death was heartbreaking because he seemed like the type who could outlaugh any tragedy. Instead, cigarettes cut his story short. Carson's loss was a reminder that even the brightest personalities could be darkened by the culture of smoke. He left behind dozens of roles that still sparkle, but his early exit left fans wondering how much more he could have given if not for cigarettes. William Talman. Fans of Perry Mason will remember William Talman as the sharp prosecutor Hamilton Burger, forever clashing with Raymond Burr's Mason in court. On screen, he was tough, relentless, and endlessly determined. Off-screen, though, Talman was battling an addiction to cigarettes that would cost him his life. Diagnosed with lung cancer in the late 1960s, Talman made history as one of the first actors to film an anti-smoking ad while terminally ill. It aired after his death in 1968 at 53 shocking audiences. His willingness to confront his disease publicly made his story unforgettable. He wasn't just another victim, he became a warning. Talman's legacy is twofold: as a formidable actor and as a man who used his final days to try to save others. That makes his story stand apart from many of his peers. John Ireland. John Ireland's rugged good looks and piercing eyes made him a natural for westerns and noirs. With roles in All the King's Men and Spartacus, he built a reputation as a dependable actor who brought grit to every role. But like many of his contemporaries, cigarettes were his constant companion. By the early 1990s, lung cancer had claimed his health. In 1992, he died at 78. Another golden era faced silence by smoke. Ireland's death didn't get the same headlines as some of his peers, but his career was long, steady, and influential. He worked with some of Hollywood's greatest directors and left behind a trail of memorable performances. His passing reminds us that the toll of smoking wasn't just on the giants. It struck down the workhorses too, the actors who carried Hollywood forward day by day. Ray Milland. Ray Milland won an Oscar for The Lost Weekend, playing an alcoholic spiraling out of control. Ironically, in real life, his bigger battle was with cigarettes. Throughout his career, Milland was rarely seen without a smoke, on-screen or off. By the 1980s, the decades of smoking caught up to him. In 1986, at 79, Milland died of lung cancer. His death was particularly haunting because his most famous role had already shown the world the dangers of addiction. In a way, Milland became his own cautionary tale. Audiences adored his versatility, from drama to comedy to horror. But in the end, cigarettes cut short his final chapters. His story underscores the recurring tragedy of Hollywood's golden age. Brilliance dimmed by the silent killer lurking in every stylish puff. Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason, the Great One, was larger than life, literally and figuratively. From the Honeymooners to his big screen roles, Gleason could dominate a room with his booming laugh and charisma. But off-screen, his indulgent lifestyle included heavy drinking and chain smoking. Those habits eventually ravaged his health. In 1987, Gleason died at 71, with lung cancer one of the major culprits. For fans, the loss was particularly cruel. Gleason always seemed unstoppable, the kind of man who could eat, drink, and smoke endlessly while still making everyone laugh. But behind the laughter was a body paying the price. His story feels especially bittersweet because his talent was so infectious. His presence made audiences feel good, even while he was quietly destroying himself. Gleason's death was another stark reminder that the Golden Age's biggest smiles often mask the deepest costs. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn's fiery energy made him unforgettable in roles like Zorba the Greek and Lawrence of Arabia. A two-time Oscar winner, Quinn brought vitality and passion to every character. But his personal life bore the same flaws so many of his peers. Relentless smoking. By the late 1990s, Quinn's health was crumbling, with lung cancer playing a significant role in his decline. He died in 2001 at 86. Quinn's death resonated deeply because he seemed so alive, so brimming with strength, even in his later years. He embodied vibrancy, yet cigarettes drained him of the very vitality that defined him. Fans mourned not just the actor, but the larger-than-life force who could make a single dance or line of dialogue feel unforgettable. His passing was proof that even the strongest personalities could be dimmed by Hollywood's deadliest addiction. Burt Lancaster. Burt Lancaster, with his athletic frame and magnetic presence, was the epitome of Hollywood strength. From Here to Eternity to Elmer Gantry, he was a chameleon, shifting between rugged action and powerful drama. Yet behind the energy was a lifelong cigarette habit. In the 1990s, his health deteriorated under the weight of lung cancer and heart disease. Lancaster died in 1994 at 80. His loss was monumental. Here was a man who had performed his own stunts, built a career on vitality, and represented a vision of unshakable masculinity, only to be undone by smoke. The tragedy of Lancaster's story is the gap between image and reality. He looked indestructible, but cigarettes made him mortal. His death was not just a Hollywood obituary, it was a cultural wake-up call. Victor Mature. Victor Mature, often called the Beautiful Hunk, was a staple of 1940s and 50s epics like Samson and Delilah. With his broad shoulders and smoldering looks, he was Hollywood's go-to strongman. Off-screen, however, Mature was a lifelong smoker. By the 1990s, his health collapsed under the weight of lung cancer. In 1999, he died at 86. His passing was deeply ironic. Mature had been cast as biblical heroes and larger-than-life warriors, yet he couldn't conquer the cigarette habit that shadowed him. Fans remembered him fondly for his charm and humor, but the tragedy was clear. The actor who once embodied superhuman strength was felled by something as ordinary and deadly as smoke. Mature's story highlights the bitter reality. Even Hollywood's gods were never immune to cigarette's grip. Walter Matthau. Walter Matthau's grumpy charm won audiences over in classics like The Odd Couple and Grumpy Old Men. He was the quintessential cranky but lovable character actor. But behind the humor was a lifelong addiction to cigarettes. Matthau's health suffered greatly from smoking, and by the late 1990s, he was battling multiple illnesses, including lung cancer. In 2000, at 79, he passed away. His death left fans devastated, especially because Matthau's humor felt timeless. He was the kind of actor who could make misery hilarious, who found comedy in flaws. The tragedy of his story is that cigarettes took away a man who still had more laughs to give. He was a reminder that humor might lighten hearts, but it couldn't save lungs scarred by decades of smoke. Richard Widmark. Richard Widmark burst onto the scene in Kiss of Death with his chilling portrayal of a giggling psychopath. Over time, he became one of Hollywood's most respected leading men, carrying films like Judgment at Nuremberg. Widmark was also a heavy smoker, and his later years were plagued by lung cancer. He died in 2008 at the remarkable age of 93, but the cause was the same silent killer that had claimed so many before him. Widmark's story is fascinating because he lived longer than most of his peers, but even longevity couldn't erase the price of decades of cigarettes. His passing symbolized the final curtain for an era, another golden age giant whose fate was tied to Hollywood's smoke-filled past. William Powell. William Powell, the debonair star of the Thin Man series, was one of Hollywood's most elegant figures. His suave delivery and effortless charm made him a favorite of the 1930s and 40s. But elegance didn't save him from the habits of his time. Powell was a smoker for decades, and lung cancer eventually caught up with him in the early 1980s. He died in 1984 at 91. His passing was bittersweet. On one hand, Powell lived a long life, leaving behind a legacy of sophistication and wit. On the other, his death still traced back to the culture of cigarettes that Hollywood once glorified. Powell's story reminds us that charm and elegance might dazzle audiences, but smoke showed no favoritism. It claimed even the most refined of men. Orson Welles. Orson Welles was the boy genius who gave the world Citizen Kane, but his brilliance extended far beyond directing. As an actor, his deep voice and commanding presence defined an era. He was also famously indulgent, whether with food, drink, or cigarettes. By the 1980s, Welles's health had deteriorated significantly. Lung cancer was among the ailments that plagued him, and in 1985, he died at just 70. Welles's passing was heartbreaking because his mind remained sharp until the end, but his body couldn't keep up. For fans, the loss was enormous. Here was one of cinema's greatest minds, taken not by artistic failure, but by something as ordinary as cigarettes. His story was a tragedy of indulgence, the cost of brilliance entwined with vice. Lionel Barrymore. Lionel Barrymore, the eldest of the famous Barrymore acting dynasty, was a powerhouse of early Hollywood. Known for his performances in Grand Hotel and It's a Wonderful Life, Barrymore had one of the most commanding presences of the Golden Age. Yet his life was riddled with health problems, worsened by years of smoking. By the early 1950s, lung cancer compounded his already fragile state. He died in 1954 at 76. Barrymore's death was another blow to the dynasty, proving that even the most talented families weren't immune to cigarettes' legacy. Fans mourn not just the actor, but the patriarch of a Hollywood lineage. His story stands as one of the earliest warnings that cigarettes, once considered sophisticated, were slowly carving through Hollywood royalty. George Peppard. George Peppard, best remembered as the suave star of Breakfast at Tiffany's and later as Hannibal on the A-Team, was a classic case of charm wrapped in cool confidence. But Peppard was also a lifelong smoker, and by the early 1990s, his health deteriorated rapidly. In 1994, at just 65, he died of lung cancer. His loss hit especially hard because Peppard still had so much left to give. Fans remembered him as stylish, smooth, and endlessly watchable. But his story ended too soon. The tragedy of Peppard's death is that he represented the last of the old Hollywood charm colliding with modern television fame. He bridged eras, but cigarettes cut the bridge short. His story is one of promise, success in the shadow of smoke. 40 actors, 40 legends, and one devastatingly consistent ending. Lung cancer. Hollywood once glamorized cigarettes as the mark of sophistication, rebellion, and cool. But behind the glamour was an epidemic that claimed icons left and right. From Bogart to Peppard, from Lancaster to Gleason, the smoke that lit up the screen also dimmed it forever. So here's the question. Which name on this list shocked you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more hidden Hollywood truths, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous props are the ones that look the coolest.